As the cheers of hundreds of successful Reform councillors, 2 mayors and an MP begin to subside, thoughts turn from running campaigns to the business of running public services. Nigel Farage said in an interview on this programme yesterday that every county needs a Doge. That's a reference to Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency and its drive to cut costs and jobs within the US public sector. Here's Farage.
We are deeply dissatisfied with the way that county councils and unitaries in Britain have been running their budgets. We look at the millions a year being spent in many cases on consultants. We look at money being spent on climate change, on areas that county councils, frankly, shouldn't even be getting involved in. So we want to get the auditors in.
Well, so how much fat is there to trim and how might they go about it? We can speak to Darren Grimes, newly elected councillor for Durham County Council and former GB News host, and also Tony Travers, professor in the School of Public Policy at the LSE. Good morning to you both. Darren Grimes, speaking in Durham, Nigel Farage said, "I would advise anyone working for Durham County Council, working on climate change initiatives or diversity, equity, inclusion, to start looking for alternative careers very, very quickly." Do you know how many people fall into that category?
Well, look, I think first of all, it's worth saying that actually, my heart goes out to absolutely everybody that has put their trust and faith in Reform UK, those breakthroughs across the country, 677 seats. That's absolutely huge and beyond all expectations. I don't think you had any pundits on Radio 4 that were predicting such a massive share of the vote. On that point, look, on day one of being in control, we're getting the auditors in, right? We're sending them in straight away because we're not.
That sounds like an extra cost to me.
Yes, a cost for an ultimate saving, of course. Because whether it's been Red Rosette, whether it's been a coalition Rosette, which is what we had on Durham County Council since 2021, it's the same ideology underneath. Ultimately, what we've had is an obsession with net zero, whether that be tied into everything from pension schemes to the overall running of the council. We've had the open
just to be clear,
borders that have meant that actually the money spent on HMOs, which is homes with multiple occupancies. The number of people that I heard say it is a damn disgrace that we are giving rented accommodation to illegal migrants whilst our own people, your kids, struggle to get on the property ladder. We've got those diversity jobs that Nigel mentioned and managed to decline.
Let me ask you about those diversity jobs and the people who might be working on green initiatives or net zero initiatives. Will you be sacking them?
Well, we're getting the auditors in to see that actually what those jobs are and if they're good value for money. And if they're not, well, the answer is, goodbye.
Is it but is it the cost you don't like or the ideas themselves?
Well, look, whether or not I don't like the ideology of net zero, for example. So, yes, I could argue that actually it is the cost and the ideology. But there is nothing wrong with that, right? Voters do not want ideology in their local government, right? They just want public services to be ran for the best bang for their buck.
Well, let's talk about those public services.
People are really struggling.
Well, bang for your buck, because the bucks are short, aren't they? Tony Travers, many councils hard up. How much of what they do is discretionary?
Well, some of it's discretionary, but actually after now 15 years of pressure on council budgets, most of the discretionary stuff will have been cut away. I mean, what councils are really left with is providing social care for children and for adults. They're providing libraries, filling in potholes on highways. Most of this is pretty, day-to-day stuff. And you have to say that councils' budgets are lower than they were 15 years ago in real terms, and per capita a long way lower. So I think it's going to be very, very hard to find substantial savings in this part of the public sector.
Have you got any idea about what proportion might go on the kind of programmes that Nigel Farage and Darren Grimes there want to cut?
It will be vanishingly small. And remember, most of these were Conservative-controlled counties. They were not famed for their, major spending on these particular spheres of public policy. Most of what they're doing, I say, is trying to deliver often on contract to private companies, and therefore they're fixed into contracts, day-to-day services, and at a level of spending lower, as I said, than 15 years ago. So I think it's going to be very hard to squeeze much Doge-like expenditure out of these particular budgets, which is not to say there aren't parts of the public sector, but outside local government, where it might be a little easier.
Darren Grimes, there isn't that much fat to trim here. There's a vanishingly small amount to be saved on the kind of programmes that you dislike.
Look, I recognise that we are, not just in Durham, but Reform are inheriting right now councils absolutely drowning in debt. You know, Durham alone is over 400 million quid in the red, and that's not including, of course, the resurfacing of that debt interest. But, you know, under the essential services being underfunded, right, which is a claim that is often made. Well, how are we spending fortunes on net zero pet projects as a council then? How are we, you know, some councils building rainbow crossings or 70k a year diversity managers and all these other things? We need to actually get the auditors in, scale back bloated parts of local government and actually review, as your guest says there, the contracts. The contracts need to be looked at. We need to shift money into actual priorities for people. That includes fixing potholes. That includes funding social care. You can't go a mile in County Durham without hitting a pothole. And actually ensuring that the send for provision for children and, of course, adult health and social care. I've heard some really harrowing stories over my time knocking on doors during this campaign, but also a really heartened amount of people who are offering a really large amount of support for our agenda. You know, we're not going to allow our communities to be a dumping ground for illegal migrants, for example.
Let me just,
we will robustly challenge that.
Okay, let me just talk again to Tony. One thing, talked there about debt interest. There's also some PFI, kind of these private finance initiative contracts. Can they be looked at? Is there scope there?
Well, PFI, you know, these are contracts which councils have signed over the years in order to get assets today, but with service costs that go off into the future. Trouble is, they are contracts. Occasionally they can be renegotiated, but as with contracts for social care or children's care, many of them are right to the bone. I mean, these services have had contracts written to provide services which themselves create enormous pressure for the private sector delivering the services. So I think anything that's delivered on contract, you have to unpick a contract, and that's very difficult. So, as I say, I think it's going to be hard to produce other than tiny amounts of money at the margin compared with the scale of the pressure on the budgets that all the council's reform have just won.
Tony, thanks to you. Tony Travers, Professor in the School of Public Policy at LSE, and Darren Grimes, newly elected councillor for Durham County Council. Thank you both.